So we've been talking about elements, and today we're going to look at pennies and kind of make a metaphor of how different elements can have something called isotopes. Every element has its own special set of unique chemical and physical properties. So when we're looking at these pennies right here, they all look the same, right? Very similar. Maybe they have different years on them, but otherwise they look really similar. So if we start looking at these pennies, let's start massing them out. Put that on the scale, 2.49 grams. Put it on the scale, 2.48 grams, extremely close. Put it on the scale, 2.50 grams, very close to 2.49. Put it on the scale, 2.50. Put it on the scale, 2.50. So all of these pennies right here had about 2.5 grams for their mass. What about this penny? Oh, well, that's a little heavier, 3.05 grams. How about this penny? Oh, that's a little heavier too, 3.14. Weird. What about this penny? Wow, over 3 grams as well. So if we break these pennies into two different groups, the first 5 pennies we did were all right around 2.5 grams. The last 3 pennies were over 3 grams, but they look nearly identical to each other. And that's what isotopes are. Isotopes are atoms of elements, so they look identical to each other. But for some reason, they have different masses. And the reason for that is because the ones that are heavier, in this case these pennies, have more neutrons than the lighter ones. So even though the protons and number of electrons are the same for this element, the heavier ones have more neutrons. And that's what an isotope is. The same exact element, but some of the elements are slightly heavier than the other ones. So when we talk about an element and we talk about its makeup of having protons, neutrons, and electrons, we have to remember that the number of protons and neutrons affect the mass, and if they have more neutrons, they're heavier. If they have less neutrons, they're lighter. Something to explain. Do you know why pennies are usually around 2 different masses? Newer pennies are no longer made of pure copper. In fact, they just have a thin copper coat on them. Older pennies, before 1982, were made of pure copper. So that's why older pennies are slightly heavier than newer pennies. But it's a great way to explain a metaphor for an isotope. The same exact element, same physical properties in that, only difference is one's a little bit heavier than the other. Think about that, and thanks for sticking with us, Science Fam.